Hi, folks. Welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. We have a very special show tonight, and I'm honored to have the guest that we have on. And I think many of you are going to really enjoy this show. Now, I'll admit that this content tonight is kind of specific to Missouri, but even though many of you aren't in Missouri, you're going to be wanting to hear this, whether or not you have friends and family in Missouri, or maybe you want to encourage people in your state to do the same, because this is a very, very important thing that we're talking about. And I'm very honored tonight to have Senator Bill Eigel. He is a senator from Missouri in Missouri's 23rd Senate District, which is the St. Charles County, or part of St. Charles County, I believe.
Yep.
That's for those of you that aren't Missouri, St. Charles County is kind of northwest of St. Louis, outside of St. Louis,
Yep.
Metro area. Senator Eigel served in the United States Air Force as a captain and does a lot of stuff. And I'm telling you, this man is on fire this year. Most of you that watch me on a regular basis, you know that I don't really get into the politics, the details of the politics a lot. But what this man is doing just inspired me, and I just had to get him on this show. So you are the first politician to ever be on this channel in almost 5 years. So
Wow.
yeah, I don't know if that's an honor or not.
Got to keep an eye on me, though. Then I got to keep a close eye on these politicians.
Right.
Great.
And my listeners they're kind of tough, but I just want to let all you listeners know, this is he may be a politician, but I believe he's definitely one of us. So Senator Eigel, thank you for coming on. It's an honor to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. And I understand we're going to talk about the issues that I think a lot of folks are talking about, and
yes,
how to protect ourselves from unrestrained and out of control government. So anytime that's the conversation, I'm happy to be a part of it.
Absolutely. Well, Senator Eigel has a huge amount of bills that he sponsored this year, and every one of them, we were just talking before we started recording, every one of them are absolutely amazing. I mean, if we had a tenth of our legislatures, both state and national, that stood for the kind of stuff that he's proposing, my goodness, we'd have a whole different country. But there's one in particular that really caught my eye, and several other people in the state. And let me click over here so that I read it correctly. The title, it's called Senate Bill 100, and it creates and modifies provisions relating to gold and silver.
That's right.
And so if I'm correct, this is a bill that kind of solidifies gold and silver as legal money in Missouri. Is that okay?
That's the headline. That's
the headline. So if you would kind of just give us the brief rundown of what this bill actually is, and why, maybe after that, why you think Missouri needs it, or any state needs it.
Yeah, actually, and Travis, that was a really great point. For a lot of your listeners that may not be in Missouri right now, we're seeing Senate Bill 100 as possible model legislation for every state in the union.
Yes.
So even if you're not in Missouri, this may be the template that a lot of states are looking for to protect themselves from a government in Washington, D.C. that is so out of control that they're enacting policies and spending money to an extent that they're inflating our currency to the point where that may not be a viable standalone currency in the future. And so Senate Bill 100 addresses that directly by making gold and silver legal tender in the state of Missouri. So there's only a couple states that where that's even being talked about right now. So we want to be kind of at the leading edge where if you have gold and silver, that can be that under this bill, Senate Bill 100 could be used as legal tender in the state of Missouri. But it does a lot more than that. You know, it's kind of the question, but wait, there's more.
Yes, there's a lot to
it. In addition to making gold and silver legal tender, it also immediately eliminates capital gains taxes and income taxes on the buying and selling of gold and silver in the state of Missouri. So Missouri is already one of the few states that doesn't charge you sales tax when you buy and sell gold and silver. Well, under the provisions of Senate Bill 100, if you sold gold or silver in the future for a profit, you wouldn't be charged income tax in the state of Missouri. So we'd be one of only a handful of states that has that exemption as well. And maybe most importantly, for the protection of the state. And I'm a big believer in talking about that. None of the solutions that I think we need in this country are going to be coming from Washington, D.C. So I'm always
Yes.
looking at different ways to strengthen the states in the face of an unrestrained federal government. And so what
Mhm.
Senate Bill 100 also does is it requires the treasurer of our state to keep a small percentage, 1% of the state reserves in physical gold and silver to be used as a hedge for the state to protect us. So if the US dollar continues to lose its value, we will still have a hedge because we'll be keeping part of our gold, our part of our reserves in the state of Missouri in gold and silver. So
Mhm.
it's a great hedge. And as things get worse in Washington D.C., that's going to be one thing that can help protect the finances of the state of Missouri. So there's a lot of folks that are talking about this bill, and I started really getting engaged. Not just from the moment that I got into office, because when I got into office, as I was a Republican that was saying, "Hey, it feels like we got a lot of government around here. We need to get away from all this government." But
Yeah.
when I got into office, the size and scope of government at all levels right now is such that at any point our rights as independent citizens are coming under assault. And
Mhm.
so a couple of years ago, a lot of your listeners may be familiar with the Second Amendment Preservation Act that we
Yes,
passed
sir.
here in the state of Missouri. I was one of the key co-sponsors of that bill. I helped the sponsor Eric Burleson get that over the finish line. That's probably ranks at one of my most proud accomplishments of protecting the rights of the citizens. So now we've done that, and now we're coming back to some of the more fiscal issues related to the resources of the state. And I think making gold and silver something that's available as a legal tender, making gold and silver something that's available that's not going to be charged additional income taxation.
Mhm.
I think that's a good thing for the state of Missouri and any other state that wants to copy what we're doing.
Absolutely. As in case any of you listeners haven't figured out, he's not your typical politician, folks. He
That's
well, what the first thing I wanna know, 'cause this is not your typical type of legislation that any kinda, congressman or senator would probably propose. It's you're kind of you're stepping out of line, so to speak, and maybe you've probably heard that in back rooms and stuff. I dabbled a little bit. I never got elected. I did run, but I've been to the state capitol many times, and so I have a little bit of an idea of how politics really works. Um, but what inspired you to do this? Like, what is it that in your heart you really want to see with something like this getting passed and happening here? I mean, you already mentioned, obviously the a hedge against the US dollar that is weakening. I mean, I think we're I'm not saying it's going to happen next week or even next year, but I think we're definitely in the realm now of the US dollar, not being what it once was. So what kind of, got you going on this?
well, when you get into politics, what generally drives you into politics is what is wrong in politics, not as
Mhm.
what is right. And if you look at our politics today, what's driving me on this bill is the same thing that's driving me on most of the bills I filed, which is the irresponsibility of government elsewhere. And in this
Mhm.
case, it's the federal government in Washington, D.C., spending tax dollars that they don't actually have, whether it's borrowing money, whether it's printing more money. When you say it may not be next week. Sometimes I'm surprised it wasn't last year
Yeah,
that we saw
exactly.
the onset of hyperinflation
Yes.
that can have devastating effects for our economy. So finding different ways to protect the state is always something I've interested in. Now, I filed a lot of bills that cut taxes, that try to reduce. I'm one of those lone voices in the Missouri Senate chamber voting against these awful budget bills as Missouri spends more and more federal and local dollars on priorities that really a lot of folks don't even understand, like me, if what we'd be getting any benefit, if any. So
Mhm.
the desire to protect the state of Missouri in the event that the federal government cannot continue in the manner that it's going right now really was a wake up call. And quite frankly, this bill, like almost every bill I file, did not come at the behest of some powerful special interest in Jefferson City. It actually was brought to my attention as a good idea from the grassroots movement that said, hey, if you're going to be down there in Jefferson City, what are different ways you can protect us and our ability to set up a working society in the event that our federal overlords in Washington, D.C. Ultimately fly off the rails? Well, one of the ways we can do that is by making us more independent, by keeping a little bit of our state reserves in physical gold and silver, and allowing Missouri citizens to use gold and silver as a legal tender. So it's a step in the right direction. And by far, I don't want to make it seem like this is the end all be all bill that's going to solve all our problems, but it's one more protection that I think fits within the proper role of government, which is to protect our rights. And if we can pass a bill like this, then we can continue moving on to some of the other bigger mountains that I think we also need to climb somewhere in the future.
Absolutely. And my listeners probably are a little bit more in tune to this than the average person, but honestly, I don't think a whole lot of people understand how, number one, fragile our financial system and state is here in the United
Right.
States, and then our dollar, and then what that would mean. I mean, we've all, every one of us, no matter how old you are, we've all lived in a country where we've been, our money has reigned supreme. I mean, you could
Mhm.
go anywhere in the world and use, US dollars, and countries and businesses invest here in America, and they invest in our money. I mean, we have, to use a kind of a left word that I don't like to use a lot, but privileged. We are privileged in America because of our currency.
Right. Right.
And
Well,
that might not be that way very much longer when you see the
mhm.
things that Russia and China and BRICS are doing. And, Saudi Arabia is becoming weaker and weaker on, only using the US dollar, which has been an agreement for decades.
Right.
Um, China and Japan, the two largest holders of our debt, are selling off, US treasuries. So,
Mhm.
it's like the handwriting's on the wall.
Yeah.
And, and and people that want to prepare. I mean, that's a huge topic of this channel, and gold and silver is certainly one of those things that a lot of my listeners are into. And this bill opens the doorway for Missourians to be able to use it, and for businesses to like you said, it doesn't fix everything, but it's definitely swinging the doors wide open, so that at some point, your local gas station and you can transact business in gold and silver.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you really touched on it, Travis. The America's status with the U.S. dollar being the reserve currency of the world
Hmm.
is what has allowed us to print and borrow in an unrestrained manner and not end up like Germany did in the 1930s.
Yes.
Uh, if we were not the world reserve currency, where everybody has to conduct international business using those American dollars, then we would very quickly find ourselves having to go to the local Walmart or Stop and Go with wheelbarrows full of cash just to pay our
Yes.
bills, because that would be the result of all the unrestrained deficit spending.
Yes.
Now,
Yeah.
like you said, the writing's on the wall that some of the biggest economic interests on the planet, you're talking about China, you're talking about Russia, you're talking about Saudi Arabia, are coming to the realization that if we control the currency that they have to use, they may not be with the direction they want to go. So
Hmm.
they're looking for different ways, maybe different currencies other than the US dollar, to start transacting businesses, which
Hmm.
means that the days of our unrestrained spending are coming to an end.
Yeah.
And if those days ended tomorrow, the impact, the ripple impact that that would have on the American economy would be devastating. I mean,
Yeah.
half of the dollars being spent, in fact, it may be more than half of the dollars being spent now in Washington D.C. are either borrowed or printed. If you
Hmm.
look down in the state of Missouri, it's even more pressing. I mean, of our state budget, 50% of our state budget comes from the federal government, which means if the federal government loses its ability to print and borrow all those dollars, overnight, Missouri is going to lose half of a $50 billion budget.
Yeah.
That's devastating for some of our biggest government programs, which are poorly run in the first place. And so, I feel like I'm that lonesome voice down in Jefferson City,
Yeah. Exactly.
calling out and crying out that we have a big problem coming down the pipeline. We have to
Hmm.
start preparing now for the reality that unrestrained government already failed in places like the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, and we've got to prevent that here. And if we don't, then the folks that I think a lot of your listeners that are taking preparation, whether it's investing in gold and silver, doing all the things that create a life independent of government, those are going
Hmm.
to be the ones that are best prepared to weather that storm.
Absolutely. The in the prepper world, there's always these, scenarios. Well, would a nuclear war take us out, or would a, an EMP, or, the grid going down? I don't know that there's much that would be more devastating to a nation, any nation, but especially
Right.
ours because there's so much debt. We're so big,
Mhm.
it's sometimes being too big is a bad thing.
Right.
That, our currency collapsing. And just the other day, I was did a video and I showed pictures in Venezuela, which their currency collapsed and it's
Yeah.
worthless. And there are
That's right.
street vendors. I don't know if you've seen these. I should have had the picture ready, but I don't know if you've seen them, but there's these street vendors and they're taking their currency, which they have just stacks and stacks of it, and they're folding it and making it into little pieces of art like origami or making it into baskets so that they can sell it because they have so much currency that's worthless and they're trying to make at
Yeah.
least something off the currency. And then I saw another one in Argentina, which they're on the verge. I mean, they're on the way down. And there's an artist, a local street artist, and he takes their currency and he paints pictures on it so that he can try to make a little bit of money off of the currency that's pretty much worthless there.
Yeah.
And I think Americans, we have this idea that we're the biggest and the best, and that's never gonna happen here, but, I mean, we're looking at almost 32 trillion in debt, and the
Mhm.
spending is just we used to say they're like drunken sailors, but that's an offense to sailors anymore. I mean, the spending is just it's crazy. It's absolutely
Yeah.
crazy spending, completely unrestricted, and there's pretty much only one way I think we're gonna head if that continues.
Yeah. Well, you know what frightens me most when we talk about the threats to America and our way of life right now. I always describe the unrestrained spending that will lead to an economic collapse as the number one threat to our country. The reason I say
Yeah,
that is that the difference between some of the other things we may worry about, nuclear war, EMP blast, something significant would have to change from what we're doing right now, the way the world is operating right now, for something like that to occur.
right.
However, for an economic collapse to occur as a result of unrestrained spending, nothing has to change in order to get to that end. We
We're
can
already doing
continue
it.
to do exactly what we're doing right now, and
Yeah,
we will get to that end. So
yeah.
the absence of some sort of catalyst or change agent required to get us to that nightmare scenario is precisely what makes it the most likely to happen. So,
Mhm.
for me, and I think for a lot of folks that are waking up to this realization that, I always say, I always ask folks when I go to political events and rallies, I always say, I ask the crowd, do you know that right now you're giving more to government than you've ever given before, federal, state, local. You've never
Mhm.
sent more of your bank account to government than you do right now. And I ask how many of you people probably realize that, and a lot of people may raise their hands. They kind of realize that the burden on citizens is greater than it's ever been. And then
Mhm.
I ask, now how many of you would say that you're getting more for all that sacrifice than you
Yeah,
ever have before? And nobody raises their hand.
yeah.
So we have so much government right now, so much government and so much burden on our from the homeschooler that's trying to teach their children their values growing up in their household, to the business owner that's being choked so slowly that they hardly even notice anymore, because every time you turn around there's another tax that they have to pay or
Right.
another regulation that they have to follow so that they don't get thrown in jail.
Mhm.
There's so much government that people just don't realize how bad it's really gotten, and how much of our society is being taken up by a government that really usually doesn't have your best interest in mind. So
Yeah.
for me, it just comes again once back to the idea of we've got to find a way to prepare for the inevitable. And I think the inevitable is that government is not going to be able to continue spending in the manner that it is right now, one way or the other.
Right. I actually read I think it was yesterday or the day before, I believe it's one of the and this on a federal level, but one of the, tax, bills that's being proposed by, Democrats, would actually put some of Americans' certain tax brackets in paying higher taxes than they do in China, in a communist country. That's just I don't know. I did
I'm pretty sure that wasn't the message of the 2022 election.
Exactly. It's like, does
Yeah, that's what
anyone
they
not
heard.
get this? That you'd be paying higher taxes than you do in communist China. Um, on this bill, are there, what kind number 1, I wanted to ask, what kind of feedback are you getting? And if you wanna talk about split it between just the people and then your fellow peers in Jefferson City,
Mhm.
that I wanted to ask that, and then even though I know as a this type of bill, it doesn't necessarily, draw out all the details of how gold and silver would become a usable money in
Mhm.
Missouri. But if there was anything you wanted to add to that, if you've talked to people, if there's, are there people or businesses, that said, hey, we're going to start planning as if this happens.
Mhm.
Basically the reception. If you could
Uh,
kind of talk on that.
Well, the reception has been incredibly not only positive, but it goes far beyond the borders of Missouri.
Hmm.
We're actually getting national attention on this particular bill, on Senate Bill 100, because of the implications it potentially has for other states that are also telling themselves the same thing that we are, which is, whoa, the federal government is out of control. We've got to do something to begin protecting ourselves.
Hmm.
So I don't know. There are other bills that we filed that have more of a direct impact just to the state of Missouri than this bill. But I don't think there isn't legislation I've seen in my 6 years in the Missouri Senate that have really started to gain the national attention of this particular bill. And I think it's because, for like I said, those states are saying to themselves, "Whoa, wait, we got to do something better here." Here's another state that's taking action. I think Texas is trying to implement some of these types of policies, but it just takes one state to get something like this over the finish line, and we
Hmm.
could really find ourselves as a domino effect for other states in the union that one way or another they're going to be facing the same reality we are. So
Yep.
it's been very positive. I expect that we're going to get a good, healthy discussion on this bill, and I'm cautiously optimistic we're going to get something done. So stay tuned for the next few months.
Yeah. I've talked to a few people and I said, if and I'm speaking specifically of the legislatures, your peers, if they could put aside their political differences, this isn't specifically a conservative or Republican issue. I mean,
Right,
a not liberal Democrat, but kind of your old school Democrat, I think could look at this and say, I don't see anything, that opposes my, beliefs. This is just common sense. This is, go
right,
back, an old political term. This is common sense legislation.
yep,
And you was talking about people that are interested. I did an interview week and a half ago
hmm
with, I don't know if you're familiar with them, probably are, UPMA, which is a gold back bank in Utah.
hmm yeah,
Uh, and I did an interview with their board of directors, and here they are. They are they're a bank in a, but not in a technical sense, because they can't legally be a bank. They're not part of the Federal Reserve System, but they do function just like a bank. And you take your US dollars and you put it in their bank and they convert it to gold and silver, and then they have ways that you can actually use it. So they're not just a depository, they're not just a vault. You actually can, I have a debit card from them. So I put my Federal Reserve money in there and it gets converted to gold and silver, and then I can use it. They are interested, if this bill goes through, of because they have several branches, of potentially opening a branch in Missouri. So we could see people are talking about, well, gold and silver, that sounds great. It sounds great to have that bill, but how do we actually put it into action? How
hmm
you walk around like, back in old days with the bag of coins, how do you put that into action? This is one of those ways it could possibly happen,
right,
actually having, these private member-based banks. It's kind of like a credit union pop
hmm
up, to where, you can very easily, go buy your groceries with gold and silver in the state of
hmm
Missouri, versus using Federal Reserve notes,
hmm
which, like we've already said, that value is fluctuating. In fact, I was talking to someone just the other day, and they were complaining about how much things cost, how the price of everything, eggs, everything's gone up. And I said, well, actually, it's the value of the US dollar that's gone down. That's really what's
yeah,
happening. The
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 purchasing,
value. Yeah, a dozen of eggs is worth the same they were 50 years ago. It's the
right,
value of the currency you're using to buy that dozen of eggs that's gone down.
yep,
And going to this gold and silver, the value of gold and silver doesn't fluctuate. It's the
hmm
value of the US dollar trying to purchase or to convert that gold and
yep.
silver that fluctuates. Yeah.
Well, and Travis, as you know, there's already a secondary market that is created to determine the value of gold and silver.
Yes.
Gold and silver is traded every single day There's already a market for that that's set up, that's ready to go. I think that the free market, once it's made legal tender in a state like Missouri, the
Mhm.
free market will, just as you mentioned with that Bank of Utah, will quickly adopt measures that can connect folks to make it easy for folks to use that exchange unit. In this case,
Mhm.
ounces in terms of gold or silver or other precious metals. Let's be honest,
Right.
it's not just gold and silver. Uh, to make it available so it can be used as a very liquid exchange at your local supermarket or your local gas station. So
Mhm.
I think that that's probably the easiest portion of the discussion, and it requires very little government, which
Yeah.
I love. I love
Yeah.
that. So what we've got to do is we've got to make it legal for
Yeah.
we've got to identify in our state code that yes, it's okay, and you should be fully able to use gold and silver as a legal tender in the state of Missouri. In fact, Missouri is going to take the lead by also keeping a certain portion of its reserves in a depository in the state of Missouri, so that we're also going to hedge a little bit from a state perspective. And by the way, if you buy and trade just a currency essentially in the form of gold and silver, we're not going to charge you taxation for that either. So
Yep.
we're also going to make it a little bit easier for you to be able to move into that new world. And like you said, there's already examples of how folks are going to be able to translate that, whether it's a debit card going back to a bank like what you referred to in Utah, or just other uses of bringing the secondary market of gold and silver to bear. We already
Mhm.
have a spot price, so folks already inherently are tracking via the free market what gold and silver is quote unquote worth. So I think that's an easy step, but we got to take the first step, which is make it okay to be legal tender.
Right, Americans have a real good track record of when government gets out of their way, they're able to figure things out pretty easily.
Amazing, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it isn't,
Amazing.
government just makes things so much more difficult.
Hmm.
And yeah, I agree. I think if this door is open, there are people in this state way smarter than me that I'm sure can figure out how to make this work well, not just,
Yes.
well, it's on paper, but to actually make it happen. And there are, like we were talking, the place in Utah, and there's other places that we could probably learn from.
Mhm.
Businesses, private businesses, people could start, their own gold and silver banks here in the Missouri. There
Yeah.
there are ways that we can make this happen, exchanges and things like that. The main thing, the big thing, is just to get government out of the way so that the people can actually do this, and that's what
Yeah.
this bill is really about, isn't it?
Stunningly, the founding fathers were already correct that anything that government touches, it does so inefficiently. And
Yeah,
now, not only is the challenge to get government out of the way, it's to keep government from getting in the way in the first place. So
exactly.
it's I've always defined the proper role of government as to protect the rights of its people, and to protect the rights here of the people to exchange and do commerce with one another outside of the idea of the basic U.S. currency. I think it's a great way to go. It's a great message, and like I say, I love the idea of Missouri being the model for the rest of the country. So
Yep.
if this is something that's adopted in other states, fantastic. It's one more thing that people will be able to say, hey, look at all the good things Missouri's doing. Let's be more like them. So it's a fantastic message, and
Mhm.
we'll see how it goes.
I was, I believe it was 2008. During that time, that's when I first started helping out in politics. I was helping with different campaigns and stuff. And I had someone tell me about Missouri. They said that on the left, that California is typically the state that kind of leads the way on some new left, idea. And of course,
Hmm.
we all know that's pretty much true. But he said that Missouri is the state for the conservative. That Missouri is the state that, doesn't get a lot of attention when it comes to conservative states. Everyone focuses on Texas or Florida, and there's nothing wrong with them.
Hmm.
But he told me, he said, keep your eye on Missouri. And if you look at, we may not have been the first to pass, certain like concealed carry and then the SEPA and stuff. But when we
Hmm.
do pass it, we pass a good one. And it really
Yeah.
kind of opens the door. So I think this is going to be one of those situations. What kind of schedule do you know, or what can you tell us, so that the listeners, do they need to be starting to call their representatives now, or is there, should they be waiting, or is there a way that they can get on any kind of, list to keep track of this? How, what would be a good way for people listening to this tonight, that they can kind of keep on top of this and try to do what they can to get it passed?
The first way, there's different ways you can do this to keep in touch. You can go to directly to the Senate website, the Missouri Senate website, senate.mo.gov, to keep an idea on the actual progress of the bill. Or you can go to my website. I'm a big fan of my website. We keep everybody updated. You can go to that site. It's called letsgomo.org. If you go and you sign up there, we'll keep everybody updated on where the bill is at when it starts to head towards committee, which is the first step. It'll be
Right.
referred here probably in the next week and a half. We'll send it to committee, get a hearing, hopefully on that committee, and get it voted out of committee so that maybe by the February or March timeframe, we're bringing it back to the Senate floor for full debate and hopefully a vote. That process can be kind of a stop and go process at times
Mhm.
in the Missouri Senate, and that's the way the system is supposed to work.
Sure.
So if you trust me enough with your name and your email address where I can stay in touch, I would encourage folks to go to letsgomo.org. We're sending out, and not just updates on the gold and silver bill, but all of the legislation that I filed that I think is going to be great for the state of Missouri, reducing taxes. SAPO is precisely the kind of bill that we were keeping folks informed about. In fact, there's another bill that we're filing on that topic, which is a Senate Bill 10 that we're actually trying to get instituted in the state of Missouri that would prohibit red flag laws in the state of
Yes.
Missouri, and then prohibit local jurisdictions from accepting federal money that tries to incentivize them to create red flag laws in the state of Missouri. So,
Mhm.
in Travis, you made a really good point about Missouri leadership. I think when it comes to
Mhm.
the social issues facing our society, I think Missouri, you can look and make the case that Missouri's been a real leader. You know, when we're talking about protecting life,
Yeah.
we were a leader, one of the first states in the union to adopt a stance against abortion in the wake of Roe versus Wade. We led the
Yes.
country on concealed carry. We led the country with the Second Amendment Preservation Act. So we've been very good on that. And now, if you look at what we're trying to do on gold and silver, I think that's good as well. I would argue that we got to look at ourselves and be honest in the mirror. I think we've got some work to do on fiscal matters. We've got
Yeah.
to take a look at our state budget. We're not where we need to be. We're spending way too much money from the bureaucrats in Washington D.C. So we've got some work to do there. But there is a growing. I have found that every election cycle that's going by, more and more folks are engaging in the political conversation that have never engaged directly, maybe with politicians before. And I was one of those guys. Before I got into politics, I served in the Air Force, as you mentioned, for a few years, and then I ran my own business. And I avoided politics like the plague. I didn't want anything to do with politics because
Mhm.
if I touched government, it was just telling me I needed to pay another tax somewhere, or it was telling me I had to comply with some regulation in order to stay out of jail.
Mhm.
But I've also come to the realization, and this is why I got into politics, that if you're not thinking and communicating in the political spectrum, the politics is thinking about you. It's
Yeah.
thinking about your business. It's thinking about your resources and how it can get its hands on it.
Yeah.
So we're finding more folks, whether it's our education system, our taxation system, they're getting engaged in these conversations. So whether it's the gold and silver issue that is bringing new folks into the discussion, whether it's business owners that want to see taxes lower, whether it's parents that want to see the public education system stay out of the way of them being able to educate their child. All
Mhm.
of these things are leading to precisely the same kind of environment that led to the formation of this country in the first place. So
Yes.
the good news is we don't necessarily have to start picking up weapons at this point and going out into the streets, because there's still enough of our country left that if we're engaged in this conversation now, we can do a lot of good before things get to a crisis level. And that's precisely
Right.
what we're trying to avoid with this gold and silver bill.
Yeah. And even if, and I'm not making predictions, but even if on the federal level, that
Mhm.
the government really starts to crumble, over time, if what we need to be doing, what other people should be doing within their state, is working on their local and state level to
Right.
really strengthening that, so that if worst case scenario, the United States did start to feel like it was breaking apart or crumbling, that, the states are not going to be so tethered to that that they get pulled down with it. And I think that's you know, you may not want to say that because you're an elected official, but
Well,
I think I get that feeling from you and a couple of others here in the state, that that's kind of also another motive, is to strengthen Missouri, so that, if the US dollar does collapse, or if there was some kind of other catastrophic thing happen on a national level, that Missouri is strong enough that even though we may get a few blows, we'll
mhm.
still be standing.
Travis, you said something really important right there, and that is uh, getting folks to engage at the state and local level.
Mm.
There's a tendency, especially if you're first talking about politics, there's a tendency to get distracted by what's happening in Washington, D.C. I mean, look what happened just in the past couple of weeks as we've seen what's gone on just for the election of the House Speaker up in Washington, D.C., right?
Yes.
I keep chuckling because I keep realizing that, not having a Speaker of the House for 4 days changed my life, not at all.
Yeah,
And yet,
exactly.
the hysteria that was going on as this unfolded up in Washington D.C. was intense.
Yeah.
But to your point, regardless of what happens with the Washington D.C. government, and I don't know of anybody that's telling me that the solutions to our problems are going to come from D.C. By the way, keep
Yeah.
that in mind.
Right.
Making sure that our local communities, our states are strong. There's a term I always, when I hear folks refer to the United States, I always have a different way to put it. I refer to them as these United States.
Yes.
These United States were combined together in this union for what they determined was the greater good, and they were willing to give up certain limited rights to the federal government that they
Mhm.
couldn't do as well on their own.
Right.
But now we have the federal government, which has become so large and so powerful that it has addicted many of the states to federal money coming out of
Yeah.
Washington, D.C. And we have lost, of all the folks I hear that tell me they believe in the idea of the 10th Amendment, when you're a state like Missouri and you're getting half of your money from the federal government, who's the sovereign in that relationship?
Right.
So, making sure folks are engaged and understanding that what's happening in their state capitals is ultimately going to have a much greater long-term impact than what's happening in Washington, D.C. That's a very important point that you made. So, hopefully, we can keep folks engaged right here in the state of Missouri.
Absolutely. Well, is there any you mentioned a few other bills that you're working on. Is there anything else that you just have to share?
Yeah,
'Cause you have a whole ton of stuff that's really good.
I do, and we would have a filibuster going here real quick if I started getting it. I'll just say that I've never met a tax I wasn't willing to cut.
Mhm.
So if there's a tax cut out there, there's a really good chance I've already filed that in the state of Missouri, whether it's personal property taxes, whether it's income taxes. I mean, we talk about Florida and Texas. One of the things they're doing better than Missouri is they've gotten rid of their income tax.
Mhm.
So if you're in a state that's not growing in terms of population, the best thing that state can do is get rid of the production, the penalty on production, which is an income tax. If you're going to punish someone for producing $100 of GDP, then those businesses are going to go elsewhere to where they're not going to get punished. Right now, that's
Right.
the Tennessees, that's the Texas, that's the Floridas. I'm a guy in Missouri. I want to see that kind of success here. I think that Missouri could be strong, not just on the social issues, but on the fiscal issues that are guiding this country. So if you're interested in that, my wife believes I'm a nerd because I love talking about tax policy, but my tax policy is pretty simple. I want
Y
less of it. So
yes.
happy to talk about all those, but if it's reducing the size and scope of government, I already like it.
Absolutely. I like that too. Uh, well, man, this has been an exciting show, and you have an open invitation. If this
Great.
this thing gets closer and you want to talk about it some more, need to drum up a little bit more publicity on it.
Yeah.
Certainly, you are welcome here anytime. And I can, I'll use my resources to promote this because I truly feel that this gold and silver, like you said, it may not be have the most immediate fixes for Missouri. Some of your other tax bills have a more immediate effect
Right.
on things,
Sure.
but this gold and silver bill, it opens the doors in a way that of protection for Missouri citizens in a way that, not a lot of things out there are doing. And I think that this is something that everyone in Missouri and people that have friends and family in Missouri needs to get behind and push this because, I've read through it and I think it's a pretty solid bill. And I'm excited to see it happen here in the state of Missouri.
Awesome. Well, Travis, I will keep you posted on everything, and hopefully, the next time I come on to your show, we'll be able to report that we've produced something in the Missouri Senate that we sent over to the House, and now it's up to them to take action.
Absolutely. And then we'll start hammering on them too.
I love
All right. Mr. Eigel, thank you very much for being on here. I'm sure my listeners have enjoyed it, folks. This is the kind of stuff when I tell you to get your houses in order, to get yourselves prepared. This is the kind of stuff that we need to be working on. It's not just about stocking beans and rice in your closet. It's about getting your whole house in order, spiritually, mentally, and physically. Folks,
Yeah.
thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.